continue from where we left off last week, but I want to just do a quick review of what we are going to try to do in this presentation in our study on Daniel and Revelation. I'm going to try to just remind us of what we are looking at. I have to do a little bit of revision of what I said last week, but I think it's very important. What we focused on was the fact that what is happening in Daniel and the Revelation is really a development, is really the culmination, the climax of what has been happening in the universe since sin began. I want to make this point. What is happening in Daniel and Revelation is not simply God giving us a bit of history before it happens. This is childish and superficial. That's the most simplistic view of these prophecies. They are a part of a greater picture. Ultimately, the problem of sin began in heaven. It was transferred to the planet Earth. And then for the past 6,000 years, the conflict has been taking place in the arena of this world. And the battle is being fought in several different ways, but primarily two ways that I want to focus on. Number one was that the first thing that God wanted to do, the first important thing, God wanted to vindicate his character and to reveal his character in its beauty. These two things. God wanted to reveal his character and vindicate his character. This is what Satan attacked in heaven. That's point number one. And through the incarnation of Jesus Christ and the death and resurrection of his son, Jesus Christ, God revealed himself as the universe had never seen him before. That's point number one dealt with. God did something that opened the eyes of everybody in the universe, and that is still opening eyes. It's still opening my eyes today as to the kind of person that God is. The first accusation was dealt with. But the second accusation of Satan is not just an accusation against God's character, it's an accusation against God's government. And this is what the books of Daniel and Revelation are about. I think this is most important. Those of us who are studying Daniel and Revelation, this is the perspective we need to get. Revelation and Daniel are about the vindication of God's government, God's kingdom. Because you see, here's the point. I want to make the point clear. God is good. But even though you're a good person, okay, even though you have proven that you're a good person, even though you have proven that you're a God of love, and even though your grace and your mercy have appeared in Jesus Christ, does your system really work? Does your system of government really work? Even though you're a good person, you may not be the smartest person. God is good, but is God really that smart? Is God's system really that good? If this sounds like a ridiculous idea to you, it is, but I'm going to say this. It's easy for us to sit here and say it's a ridiculous idea. But look here, this ridiculous idea convinced many of the angels. Remember this, it convinced many of the angels, so it's not as superficial and simplistic as it appears to us. We have been trained to say, God is good and God is wise and God knows all things, okay? So we can repeat this, but in the beginning, when this started, these cliches, these words and ideas that we use so freely, they were not so clearly understood. And Satan was able to convince, we understand, a third of the angels in heaven that his system of government was better. So it's not as clear-cut as it is in our minds. God is in the business of trying to demonstrate that his government is the better government. And this is what the books of Daniel and Revelation are really about. This is the underlying reason behind these books. This is the underlying theme. And if we come to the book of Revelation and Daniel and we hold this in mind, we have a head start on how to understand the books. All right, so I hope we have understood what I've said, because I think it's the most important thing we need to keep in mind when we come to study these books. Let me
I have
pause
a
a little.
question, David.
Yes, Brother Ray, I was about to ask if there's any question, because I want to make sure we understand that point.
Yes, when you mentioned the word government, it sparked in my mind that a government has to have a place. Like, for example, the United States have this territory of all these 50 states, whatever, and that's the government we have. We have one government that is in that position. Now, before man fell, through Satan's lies, what government did Satan have in heaven when there was only one government for him to claim?
All right. Thank you, Brother Ray. That's a good question. And perhaps it's a good thing you asked the question, because others might have the same kind of perspective. Because when I say government, I don't think that the emphasis is on a place at all. I think the emphasis is on a philosophy, or on a constitution, if you want, an underlying philosophy, or another underlying principle, if you prefer. Because when you talk about a government, it's the way you administer and the way you function in governing people. Now, in most cases, different countries have a center of government, in most cases. All right, but the principle, the point that is being made when we talk about government is that Satan is seeking to suggest that his way of operation, let me put it that way, it's not so much where, it's a kind of government. Because, as you know, Satan is called the God of this world. As you know, Satan is in charge of the way the world is run. Now, on this planet, you have several places that people would look upon as centers of government. America is one place. Some people say the Vatican. You have Europe, you have China. You have different places where men set up systems of government. But yet, in spite of this, there are people who belong to neither America, nor China, nor Russia, nor Korea, and yet they are under the government of Satan. There are people in Jamaica who don't belong to any of these kingdoms, but they are still under Satan's government. So what we are looking at is the principles of operation. Satan's government is based on the principle that self-government is greater than to be under God's control. The principle of Satan's government, and if you even study, if you are able to get hold of the writings of Satanists, if you are able to understand the teachings of Satanism, the central teaching of Satanism is self-government. Satanists today don't claim to be evil. They don't claim to be, Satan is the embodiment of evil. But there are a lot of people who claim to be Satanists, and they don't claim to be evil. They claim to be simply people who are talking about the principle of self-government, which they say is a principle of freedom. They say that's how you are free. Govern yourself. God says no. God says the only way to be truly free is to allow God to govern your life, to submit yourself to the yoke of Christ is the way to obtain freedom and victory. Satan says no. So when I say government, I mean it's the adoption of these principles, because you either acknowledge God as wise and as right, or you acknowledge God to not know what he's saying. And so you adopt Satan's principle. That's what I mean by the system of government, Brother Ray. Not so much a place as a principle. Brother Wayne, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so my question is, in light of the fact that you say it is government against government, and to determine which government is worthy to carry on, go forward, wouldn't one say then that, we who read this Bible actually can make a judgment already which government is going to supersede? Wouldn't one then say it seems like God has already orchestrated that his government will be in place, no matter what?
Sure, I could say, Brother Wayne, that we who read the Bible, we are reading with biased eyes. I certainly read with biased eyes. From the moment I became a Christian, I was biased where the Bible is concerned. Anybody who speaks against it, I immediately become upset. So I am biased, okay, and I'm not ashamed of being biased. I am biased towards God. Now, you have people like atheists and skeptics and agnostics who read it and they don't see it as clearly as we see it. So I say we read with biased eyes because there are Christians who read, for example, the things that happened in the Old Testament when God commanded the destruction of entire nations. People would call it genocide. Things that God did that appear to be unfair. They would take a different position than you take. They would come to a different conclusion. This is one of the reasons why we are seeking to understand some of those things. But the point is, because of this, there is to be a final judgment to look at all the issues and to make a final determination. Because for us, it is clear-cut because we are reading with biased eyes. And besides, we see things that are not obvious to other people. So we do have an advantage. But that advantage is to be opened up to the entire universe. Everybody is to see what God's kingdom is all about. And this is what the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel is unfolding. It's giving us a view of the judgment and how it takes place and what are the issues in the judgment. And probably most important for you and me, what part we have to play in that final vindication of God's government. So this is the massive challenge that we undertake as we go through these books, and hopefully by God's grace, we can be able to explore in a way that will be meaningful and that will make an impact on all of us and those who might listen otherwise. So, the book of Daniel is where we're going to begin, and I am not going to do a verse-by-verse study of the book of Daniel. And I know this is the second time, and I did it that way the first time. I'm doing it this way the second time also. And the reason is because, you can find any number of studies out there that tell you about the image and the details and what this means and what that means, and it goes into details. I think I have some studies out there on this already. What I'm interested in is what you call a bird's eye view. It means I want us to go up high above and look down and see if we can see what is happening from a zoomed out view, so we can get the overall picture. Sometimes you get in on the details and you lose the plot because you're too focused on the details. I want us to understand the bigger picture. Now, when we come to Revelation, we may be more detailed. We will be more detailed because I think Revelation is the final chapter. It's the final saga. It's the final unfolding of God's revelation of what is happening. And I want us to be a little bit more careful in looking at the details there. But the book of Daniel, all right? Now, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint that I'm going to use. I know, as I've said before, we have been through this already, but I'm going through it again. And I myself am benefited each time I go through the prophecies. And I think because of this, I am thinking that it will be helpful for everyone as well. Now, I can't see your hands. I can only see the people who have their video on. So if somebody wants to ask a question, you'll have to unmute your mic and interrupt what I'm saying. All right? So I'm just letting you know that if you just unmute your mic, I won't be able to see because I'm only seeing the people. When I'm on this view, I only see the people who have their video on. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and begin. And I hope this works. I know that when I bring up a PowerPoint. Okay, great. Great. Okay, it doesn't take away from the GoToMeeting. So we're going to be looking at understanding Revelation. And I begin with the question, why should we emphasize prophecy at this point in time? Well, as I said, our approach is going to be that we take a bird's eye view. And the reason why we take a bird's eye view is because we will see more clearly if we zoom out and look at the general picture instead of focusing on the individual little pieces, little bits and pieces. If there's something that is involved in those little pieces that seems to be contrary to what we are looking at, please stop me and we can look at it. All right, but generally speaking, I want to take this overall view. So the theme of Daniel, it's most important. So we understood from what I just said, from what I said previously, the overall theme is the great controversy and the conflict between God and Satan. And I said that the book of Daniel and Revelation is focusing on the final chapter of this conflict, which is the part that deals with the vindication of the government of God. Now let's see how we can find this in the book of Daniel. The theme of Daniel is really restoration. If I could give it one word, I would say it is talking about restoration. It's important to understand the book of Daniel, and it's so important that here is what God says about it. When in Daniel chapter 12, the last chapter of Daniel, Daniel asks a question, and look at the answer that he's given. Daniel says, "And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things?" And he said, "Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand." This is why I would say studying the book of Daniel, and by extension the book of Revelation, is most important, because look at God says, let me see if I can find any writing tools here. All right, my spotlight. Let me see. All right. I hope you can see my spotlight, this red dot. So it says, the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand. So this would say to me, if nothing else, this would say to me, it's most important to understand the book of Daniel, because the people who will not understand are the wicked, and I don't want to be in that number. But it goes on to say also, the wise shall understand. That's the number I would like to be in. And so therefore I would say that it's most important that we understand. All right, my highlighter works. The wise shall understand. All right, it's more important that we understand the book of Daniel based on what is said here. All right, I need to go back to my normal mode. All right. So first of all, now let's take a basic outline of the book. The book of Daniel is made up of 12 chapters, and the chapters are laid out in the following way. Chapter 1, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, and chapter 6 deal with history. It has to do with the background of what happened during the time of Daniel, and even previous to when Daniel went into Babylon. As a matter of fact, let me pause a little just to make this point, that the book of Daniel, it covers a period when the Jews were captive in the city of Babylon. God carried the Jews away from their homeland, or the Babylonians were permitted to take the Jews away from their homeland, and they were carried to Babylon. The land of Judah was left almost completely empty. And the book of Daniel tells you the history, a certain history from the time that they were in Babylon, and also certain prophecies that are somewhat connected to that history. So chapter 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6, they deal with history. And then chapters 2, 7, 8, 9, 11, and 12. Well, from 9 to 12. I don't have chapter 10 here, but chapter 10 is included. It's kind of like the background to chapter 11. These chapters are dealing with prophecy. So it's important to understand that even the chapters that deal with the history, they have prophetic significance, even though they are not directly related to prophecy. For example, Daniel chapter 3 talks about King Nebuchadnezzar building a great image and commanding everybody to worship this image. I'm sure you will all recognize that this has clear connection to what it says in Revelation, that they will make an image of the beast, that the second beast will command everybody to make an image of the beast, and they must bow down and worship this image. It's the same thing that happened in Daniel chapter 3, but it happened in a literal sense with a physical image and with a physical bowing down to this image. The same thing comes back in Revelation, but when it comes back, it's not a physical image, and it's not necessarily a physical bowing down to a physical image. It happens on a greater level in a spiritual way, but it's not a literal image. It's not like when they had the Commonwealth Games, they had this image of a bull, or they have built somewhere in one of these cities, I forget where, some image of a beast. It might be in Georgia somewhere, some image of some beast that kind of resembles the Revelation 13 beast. This is not the image of the beast that we are talking about in Revelation chapter 14, chapter 13. No. It's now a spiritual entity, something you can see in a spiritual way, but not necessarily physical. In fact, I'm absolutely certain that it's not a physical image. It's a structure of government that we will be required to conform to. We will be required to give our allegiance to this system of government. And I believe this is what the image of the beast is. But it's prefigured in the book of Daniel in chapter 3. And so I believe these historical chapters 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6, they also tell stories that give us an insight into the conflict that is coming in the near future on a spiritual level. And as we go through, we'll probably look at that as well. We'll also look at how some of these stories are important. But anyway, for the most part, we are going to be looking at the prophetic chapters. Now, what is the key to understanding the book of Daniel? Why, I already mentioned that we need to understand that it is focused on the vindication of God's government. That's the key to understanding it. But within that context, there is also something important to take place. There's also an important principle concerning the book of Daniel in particular. How do we understand it? This is important because I have seen there's a brother on a forum that I'm involved in. I think I mentioned this already, but every time I see him making his comments, I cringe a little bit. Because this fellow is completely focused on the idea that the prophecies of Daniel were fulfilled in the time of Jesus Christ. He's completely focused on that idea. And this is because he doesn't understand the bigger picture. Okay? He thinks Daniel is a book that simply deals with the limited history of the Jews. It's because he doesn't understand what is happening in the book of Daniel and the purpose of the book of Daniel. God was not interested in simply telling people about Jewish history. No. The prophecies these great prophecies in Daniel and Revelation are there to prepare God's people for the final great conflict that is to take place on this earth. So it absolutely is not about something that happened 2,000 years ago. No. So what is the key to understanding the book? The key is understanding the circumstances of Israel. And let me explain that. I'm going to take my time and explain this. If you don't understand what I'm about to say, I will repeat it. So let me understand if you don't understand it. All right? Now, one of the things that we have continually emphasized in this fellowship is that the Old Covenant, the Old Testament primarily, consists of types and illustrations to teach us lessons about the New Testament. The Old Testament is a book of parables. In fact, the entire Old Testament is one great parable that teaches us lessons about some greater thing that is to happen in the future. Israel was a type of present-day people of God. Palestine, the Holy Land, was a type of the new earth and of the heavenly kingdom that we will inherit. The law was a type of the Spirit of God in the heart of God's people. Over and over, you see these types. The story of what happened to the Jews is a type of what happens to the Christian church. Let me repeat that. What we see in the book of Daniel, what happens to the Jews in the book of Daniel, is a type or an illustration of what happens to God's people in the Christian church. So the book of Daniel, the story of the Jews, the circumstances of the Jewish nation is the key to help us to unlock. Get in the door, push the key, turn the lock, and you begin to understand. If you understand, okay, look at what happened to the Jews. And it helps you to understand what is happening to God's people on a greater scale at the end of time. All right? So, first point we want to look at is that it says Israel, but to be technical, it's really the kingdom of Judah, because Israel consisted of all 12 kingdoms. But remember, by this time, Israel had been divided into two. You had the kingdom of the 10 tribes, which was referred to as Israel, sometimes as Ephraim, and you had the other kingdom of 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, and with the Levites, and this was referred to as Judah. And by this time, the 10 tribes of Israel was completely devastated by the Assyrians. They had been taken away and they had been scattered. Nobody knows what became of them. So what we're really talking about in the book of Daniel is not the 10 tribes. We're talking about the 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin and the Levites. So technically, I shouldn't have Israel here. I should have Judah, technically. But you all understand what I mean. Judah was a kingdom which had been completely destroyed. The book of Daniel is about the restoration of a kingdom. The restoration of a kingdom. The kingdom of Judah had been completely destroyed by Babylon. And this is the context of the book of Daniel. It is also the context of the end time church. It's also the context of the end time greater people of God, the greater Israel, which is you and me, which is God's people. The context is of a people who are captive in a strange place. I'll comment on that a little bit more as we proceed. So, I have here some passages from the book of Chronicles and maybe from Kings that illustrate what I'm saying. It says in 2 Chronicles 36 that the Chaldeans, let me use my highlighter again. It says that the Hebrews, the Jews, they mock the messengers of God, and they despise his words, and they misuse his prophets, until the wrath of God arose against his people, till there was no remedy. So it was the apostasy of Judah that led to this condition. Therefore he brought upon them the king of the Chaldees, who slew their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion upon young man or maiden, old men, or him that stooped for age. He gave them all into his hand. Now, here's the point. Here's a point I want us to understand. If this is an illustration of the Christian church, I want us to consider that it is suggesting that God's people who claim to be believers, who claim to be Christians, or whatever name you choose to call yourself, those who claim to be the children of Christ, are also in antitype to be taken captive by Babylon. Just like happened to the Jews, God's people in reality have also been taken captive by Babylon. The same history repeated. The book of Daniel is about this greater history But the story of the Jews tells the story in a parable form. Now, if you ask the question, why is it that God's people have been permitted to be captive in Babylon? Look at what it says about the Jews. They mocked his messengers. They despised his words. They misused his prophets. And it came to the place where there was no remedy. And so they became captives in Babylon. In a greater sense, this has been happening to the Christian church. When the Christian church got into apostasy because of the Roman Catholic disease, the disease in the corruption of the doctrines that were taking place, the Christian body went into apostasy, went into darkness, and it says it got to this place till there was no remedy. The same thing happens. And so, because of this, it says that God gave them into the hand of the king of Babylon. And so today, God's people are in spiritual Babylon. The majority of God's people are in spiritual Babylon because of this subjection to apostasy. They have not listened to the Lord. They have allowed men to take control. They have allowed men to rule them. They have allowed human tradition to determine how they worship God. And because of this, the church of God, the people of God, are in Babylonian captivity. This is what the Bible teaches. So it says that because of this, all the vessels of the house of God, great and small, and the treasures of the house of the Lord, the treasures of the kings and of his princes, all these he brought to Babylon. And they burnt the house of God, break down the wall of Jerusalem, burnt all the palaces thereof with fire, and destroyed all the goodly vessels thereof. What do we see here? What we see is that the elements of worship, the elements of true worship, were destroyed, were taken away when God's people went into Babylon. Now we are looking at something physical, but I'm saying we are to consider the spiritual implications. Because the physical parable, what happened to the Jews, the real acted parable, is telling us about the greater spiritual reality. So they took away the sanctuary, they burnt the sanctuary, they destroyed everything that was involved in the worship of the true God. And brothers and sisters, you can look at the Christian body today and you can say they don't understand true worship and they don't understand the truth. And there's darkness upon the Christian world. It is true. And it is what we saw happen to typical Israel, to typical Judah, because they stopped listening to God and they went into apostasy by allowing men to become their rulers. And the same thing happens on a spiritual level. I will tell you, in this fellowship this evening, we have 71 people, more or less. We are a minuscule drop in the bucket. There are myriads, there are probably hundreds of thousands of Christians out there worshiping this evening. The vast majority of them are in darkness. Yet, I will not be bold enough to say that they are not God's people. No, many of them are truly God's people, but they are in Babylonian captivity. They are in captivity in Babylon. They are worshiping according to idolatrous principles. Their worship is encompassed in false ideas. The sanctuary of truth is gone. And they are encased in Babylonian darkness. According to the Bible, they are still God's people. Just as the Jews, when they were in Babylon, were still recognized as God's people. They were God's people in captivity. And this is the condition of the Christian body today. Now, I know there are a lot of fake Christians out there. I'm not commenting on them. I'm commenting on the true Christians who are still in Babylonian darkness. We have the right to be sorry for them. We have the right to try to get them to see light and to understand, but we don't have the right to condemn them, because many of them are victims of circumstances like we were. I was born into a system where there was a lot of darkness, some light, but some darkness, and almost all of us were in that same position. God didn't condemn us, but he sought to deliver us from that darkness. It's the same way. This is what we are seeing as we look at this. So it says they took the king. The army of the Chaldees pursued the king. They took the king, brought him to the king of Babylon. They gave judgment upon him, and they slew the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. And they put out the eyes of Zedekiah. They bound him with fetters of brass, and they carried him to Babylon. So even the king of Judah was taken captive, and they dug out his eyes. In other words, the kingdom was completely gone. Every element of the kingdom that was represented as the kingdom of God, it was gone. The only way God's people remained alive was that they were in Babylonian captivity. I know that this sounds like it would condemn us, because you would say, okay, if God's people are in Babylon, where are we? Well, I would say that I don't believe we're in Babylonian captivity. I believe that somebody has to get out at some time. And I think we are the people who are getting out. I think the Exodus is taking place. When they went back to Babylon, when they left Babylon, they didn't all leave at the same time. Some went ahead. Some went with Ezra, some went with Nehemiah, some went they went in pockets, different groups. And I believe, some of them even didn't go back. I think some stayed in Babylon. And I believe that by the grace of God, we have come to see the nature of Babylonian captivity. And by God's grace, our minds have been set free, or are being set free. We have shed the bondage and enslavement of denominationalism. And so, yes, Brother Wayne, go ahead.
I know you're saying that we're not in Babylon. I was thinking of Daniel and Meshach and Abednego and those guys. Physically, they were in the environment of Babylon. Spiritually, they were not. Would you say then that we too, I know you say we're looking at this from a spiritual point, and so you would say then spiritually we have escaped Babylon, but what, I'm just thinking that we're still in the environment where all of what you're saying still exists. All of the oppression against God's children, we are seeing it. We are seeing it all around us. So it makes us want to think that we're still in the environment of it, but not spiritually.
Right. I understand the point you're making, Brother Wayne, and it can be confusing. And so I'm going to clarify as I understand it. Because what happened to Daniel and the Jews was type. I think that to make the type clear, if they were physically in Babylon, they were in Babylon. So even Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, although their minds were not Babylonian, although they were not captivated by Babylonian thinking, but their bodies were there. Their sanctuary was gone. They were under Babylonian bondage. So you have to categorize them as being in Babylon, because we are talking about physically being there. So the equivalent today is that you could be sitting in a church bench and you are not in Babylon because your mind is free. You could be there in that physical place and you are not in Babylon. You may be there to try to reach people. You may be there because you just want to pass through on a Sabbath. So you could say physically you are in the environment, but your mind is not there. So being free in our age means to be free in your mind. It's not so much about where your body is, it's where your mind is and where your understanding is. But I understand why it could become confusing. So I hope that clarifies that. So it says that this captivity was to last until the reign of the kingdom of Persia. And it says that this was to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah. Wrong tool. To fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths. All right, so Jeremiah had prophesied that this would continue for 70 years. And so the Bible tells us clearly that this is what happened with the Jews. They were there for 70 years. God's words were fulfilled. And I would say that it's the same thing today. Jeremiah's prophecies came true. And in the same way, today, the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation, they are there for us to help us to understand. And they are coming true, and they will come true just as surely as Jeremiah's prophecies came true. We can understand where we are in time. We can understand our purpose. We can understand God's plan for us as his people by studying those prophecies. And more than that, we can know the end of the story. We don't have to become disheartened by the things that we see happening. So it's important that we understand that there are 4 aspects to the kingdom. This is important. The kingdom that was overthrown had 4 aspects, and these are related to the greater spiritual kingdom that we are involved in. First of all, the first thing that was overthrown was the physical kingdom. I'm going to comment on that a little bit in a little while. When I say the physical kingdom, I mean every kingdom on this earth has a physical space. Like you have the kingdom of Great Britain, which has a physical landmass. England, Scotland, and a part of Ireland and Wales. America is not a monarchy, but there's still a kingdom. The land space is the United States of America, and it includes Alaska and Guam and 1 or 2 other places. So every kingdom has a physical space, a landmass. To get under that landmass, you have to have a passport, and you have to go through immigration and all of that. Then there's what we call the political kingdom, and the political kingdom is the governing aspect of that kingdom. The constitution, the rules and regulations, the principles of administration that govern this country. I know Americans are acutely aware of the political kingdom. They're always talking about the Constitution, and they're always on their toes because they think there's going to be a constitutional convention and they're going to change the Constitution, and they're always upset and alarmed about it, probably more so than anybody else in the world. So the political kingdom, I mean, when it's time for elections, there's a great furor, not only in America but everywhere, but especially it's kind of public in America, maybe because it's the most visible government. So you have the Democrats and you have the Republicans. In Jamaica, you have the PNP and the JLP, and so when I say political, I mean the governing system. In biblical antiquity, every kingdom also had a religious aspect to it. Now, this is not visibly true in the present age, but I'll comment on that in a moment. But the religious aspect of the kingdom, from the days of Nimrod, it was always there. Nimrod and his wife Semiramis, in the kingdom that they set up, they established the first idolatrous system of worship on a governmental level. The religion of ancient Babel morphed into the religion of Babylon. It spread to Egypt and all over the world, an idolatrous system that involves some kind of trinity. Now, the religious kingdom is the aspect of the kingdom that involves worship. We know that in Egypt, the Pharaoh was seen as a god king. He was seen as the priests in Egypt, for example. The Bible tells you in the book of Genesis that the priests did not pay taxes. When Joseph taxed the entire land, the priests did not pay taxes. They were regarded as being specially favored because it has been believed in all these kingdoms that the religious people, because they had connection with the divine elements, they had connection with the gods. They knew how to get the gods to work on behalf of the kingdom. They could do their ceremonies to bring rain or to bring drought or to overthrow their enemies. And so because of this, each kingdom had a religious aspect to it. And the religious aspect of Judah was the worship of Jehovah, focused on the sanctuary. This was the worship of Judah. And of course, there were prophets that were related to this. Babylon had them, Medo-Persia had them, Greece had them, Rome had them. All of them had this religious aspect of the kingdom. When Judah was overthrown, the religion was gone as well. They took away they broke down the sanctuary. They burned the vessels of the sanctuary. What was left, they carried it away to Babylon. The priesthood was scattered. The priesthood system of offering sacrifices and worshiping Jehovah, that was abolished. They weren't able to practice that in Babylon except on an individual basis. So the physical kingdom was gone, the political kingdom was gone, the religious kingdom was gone. And fourthly, the fourth aspect of a kingdom is the demography of the kingdom. And what I mean is there are always people in a kingdom. If you don't have people, you don't have a kingdom. Even the pseudo kingdom of the Vatican has a few people. All right, the Vatican is the most, what should I call it? It's the strangest kingdom. I'm trying to find the right word, but I can't put my finger on it. But it's the most, convoluted kingdom. It's not really a legitimate kingdom. It's a kingdom created.
It's an awkward kingdom.
What, Brother Ray?
It's an awkward kingdom.
An awkward?
Yes.
All right, that will do. Yes, I was thinking of something else, but the word will come eventually. But yeah, it's an awkward kingdom. It's a perversion of reality in some ways. But they do have people who are citizens of the Vatican. Strangely enough, you can only become a citizen of the Vatican if you get a job at the Vatican. If you get a job there, you automatically become a citizen. People are not born as citizens of the Vatican, so that's why it's a strange kind of kingdom. But the point is that every kingdom has a demographic. Jamaica is a country. It has presently living here a little less than 3 million people. But without these people, it would be just an empty land space. So we have these four aspects of a kingdom. And the point I'm making is that in every one of these four aspects, the kingdom of Judah was gone. And what I'm saying is that in every one of these aspects, in our present day and age, the anti-typical kingdom of God, the kingdom of Christ, is in Babylonian captivity, the physical kingdom. All right? God's church. If I ask you the question, where is it located today? Where would you point to? I mean, the Catholics might point to the Vatican or to Rome. Where would you point to? I mean, when I was an Adventist, I might say the headquarters is in Silver Springs, Maryland, or Washington, D.C., wherever it was at the time. If I was a Jehovah's Witness, I might say the headquarters is in New York, Brooklyn, New York. But we would still be pointing to only one little aspect of what we would call the church. So the point I'm making is that God's people today, there is no physical kingdom. There's no physical aspect to the kingdom of Christ right now. We're all scattered all over the place. We're not in any one landmass or any one place. The most that happens is that our minds rise to Jerusalem above. Spiritually, we focus our minds on Jerusalem, which is above, those who are truly a part of God's kingdom. The political kingdom is not ruling on planet Earth. We do have a kind of kingdom because those of us who understand the truth, our affection is towards Jesus Christ and towards heaven. And we are listening to the Lord Jesus Christ. And he's governing us on that level, on that basis. But the majority of God's kingdom, they know nothing about what I just mentioned. The majority of God's kingdom are worshiping in denominations. They are sitting down on church benches and thinking that this is the church of God. This is what God is blessing today. Politically, they are governed by their church structure, their ministers, their bishops, their general conferences, their prime religious figure, the Pope or the conference president. They have a political kingdom which is Babylonian in structure, Babylonian in nature. It's not God's political kingdom. It's not God's politics. It's Babylonian politics. The religious kingdom are God's people worshiping according to the principles of the kingdom of God? No, our worship structure The worship, I say our. I don't mean us in this little fellowship. I mean God's people in general everywhere. Their worship is confused. Their understanding of the word of God is confused. They believe in everlasting hell. They believe in the Trinity. They are worshiping under the subjugation of men. The religious system is so perverted and confused because they are in Babylonian captivity. And physically, the people are not in one place. Physically, God's people are not recognizable. Even literally, physically, we're not recognizable because we are scattered everywhere in all kinds of churches. So we are actually, even physically, most of us, still under Babylonian dominion. These are the four aspects of the kingdom that were overthrown. And these are the four aspects of God's kingdom today that are under Babylonian subjugation that God intends to fix. So let me just highlight what from the prophecy. The first prophecy in Daniel is Daniel chapter 2, and it's the prophecy of a great image. Now we are told that the head of this image was made of gold. I'm going to go through this very quickly because it's something everybody here understands, I'm pretty sure. The head of the image was of pure gold, and we understand that this head represents Babylon because the angel, because Daniel told it to Nebuchadnezzar. When Daniel interpreted the dream, Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. And he did not mean Nebuchadnezzar as an individual. He meant Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. You are the head of gold. The second part of the image was made out of silver. The breast and the arms were silver. And Daniel told King Nebuchadnezzar, after you there will arise another kingdom inferior to you, which was the kingdom of Medo-Persia, not inferior in strength, but inferior in quality. Medo-Persia was not as rich and magnificent as Babylon, but it was stronger, of course, because it overthrew Babylon. But it was inferior in terms of the riches of that kingdom. And then the third kingdom, the kingdom of brass, the kingdom of copper, was the kingdom of Greece. And this kingdom was inferior to Medo-Persia and Babylon, but it was stronger. Then the fourth kingdom of iron, of course, represented Rome. And then down in the feet of iron and clay, Rome divided. Rome was divided up and it became much weaker. It had in it the elements of clay, which is a very soft, malleable thing, but also the strength of iron, which is firm and inflexible and immovable. Now, what we notice about this image, I want you to look at this image. Notice that all of the parts of this image are made up of the metals of the earth. They are made up of the elements of this earth. They are physical. This image is pointing to the physical kingdom. The prophecy in Daniel 2 is focused on the fact that Israel had lost its physical kingdom. Physically, there was no earth. There was no land space for Israel to claim as her own. It had been taken away by the Babylonians and they had been moved to a foreign country. So this vision of the image is a vision of the physical kingdom. And I'll come to that in just a moment. Let me just go through this quickly. The second vision of Daniel 7 was a repetition of this vision of Daniel 2. You had a lion, a bear, a leopard, and a great and terrible beast. And on the head of this great and terrible beast, you had 10 horns. And a little horn came up which overthrew 3 horns. So there were now 8 horns, 7 plus 1. This second image, the second vision, instead of focusing on an image, it focused on 4 animals. And I'm going to say that these 4 animals represented the political kingdom. So you had the physical kingdom, you had the political kingdom, and then the next vision in Daniel chapter 8, it focused on 2 animals, a ram and a he-goat, which represented Medo-Persia and Greece. And the he-goat developed a notable horn in the forehead, which became exceedingly great, which I understand to be equivalent to the kingdom of Rome. So you have the same prophecy, it seems, but it's repeated 3 times. Now, I don't think it's the same prophecy repeated 3 times. I think it's the same prophecy, but each repetition is a different point of view. Number 1, the image, it's talking about the physical kingdom. We spoke about that. Number 2, it's talking about the political kingdom. God represents the political kingdoms of this world as wild animals. Number 3, it's talking about the religious kingdom. Notice that the animals we see in vision number 3 are sanctuary animals. These are the animals that you would sacrifice in the sanctuary. A ram, a sheep, a goat. So it's the same prophecy from different points of view. Physical, political, religious. And then the 4th prophecy, it talks about the king. It shows you in real time conflict between nations. Everything actually comes down to a conflict between the king of the north and the king of the south. It's interesting that in prophecy number 4, which goes from Daniel 11 to Daniel 12, God does not use symbols. He does not use an image or wild beasts or sanctuary animals. He uses literal images of people fighting. Read Daniel 11 and you'll see it's actual people that he tells you. There's no disguised imagery in Daniel 11. It's literal people. We're talking about the demographic kingdom. We're talking about God showing Daniel literal people having literal conflict and the end of the story. I'm going to comment on that a little bit more in just a short time. So basically, the 4th prophecy focuses on the king of the north and the king of the south, and it focuses on the demographic or the people of the kingdom. So the land space or the geographic kingdom, the political kingdom, the religious kingdom, and the people of the kingdom. So let's move on. The popular idea behind the prophecies of Daniel is that Daniel is made up of one prophecy which is repeated 4 times. That's how I was taught the book of Daniel, and that these 4 repetitions simply give you more details. But as I said, it's not like that. It's more than that. The true perspective is that it's the restoration of 4 different aspects of the kingdom. There is the political, there's the geographic, political, religious, and the demographic aspects of the kingdom. So the great image is the physical, as I said. And look at the text that I have highlighted in yellow. Because the text I have highlighted in yellow is the end of the story. Look at what it says. The end of the story is that the stone that smote the image, look at that stone. This is the end of the prophecy. The prophecy does not end with the feet of iron and clay. It ends with a great stone. The stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the restoration of the kingdom to the people of God. But is this speaking about the Jews? Is it speaking about the Jews? Is it that the Jews are to become a mountain to smite the other images, the other kingdoms, and the Jews are to become a great image, a great mountain, and fill the whole earth? I ask a question, but you know the answer. This is not speaking about the Jews. It's speaking about God's true people, because the prophecy has a greater endpoint than simply what happened to the Jews. What happened to the Jews is like a stepping stone. It's like a springboard. God uses it to speak of the greater history of the true church, the true people of God at the end of time. God's people are to get back their land space. God's people that have been in Babylonian captivity, we are to get back our country. The stone becomes a great mountain. The stone destroys the kingdoms of this world, and it becomes a great mountain, a great kingdom, and fills the whole earth. That is the end point of prophecy number 1. So God's people receive their physical kingdom. The second prophecy, the prophecy of the four animals, as I said, it focuses on the political kingdom. And look at the end of this prophecy. The end of this prophecy is that the Son of Man is given dominion and glory and a kingdom. It is Daniel chapter 7. What we see as the end of prophecy number 2 is that Jesus Christ, the Son of Man, receives an everlasting kingdom. It says his dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. There was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. This is the end of the story. It's not talking about the restoration of the Jewish kingdom. It's not talking about the Jews going back to Palestine and setting up a kingdom down there and Herod becoming king or whoever was becoming king. This is talking about when Christ receives his everlasting kingdom and the kingdoms of this world become the kingdom of our God and of his Christ. Daniel's end point is the end of the story. The third prophecy, the ram, the he-goat, and the exceedingly great horn, is focusing on the religious kingdom. This is to be restored also. And when you understand this, it becomes easier to understand what is happening in Daniel chapter 8. Daniel chapter 8 says, the climax of this chapter is where he says unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Now, as we have pointed out, the word cleansed here is better translated restored. Then shall the sanctuary be restored. Remember that Daniel's sanctuary, the sanctuary of the Hebrews, had been destroyed, had been wiped out by the Babylonians. Now, God says the sanctuary is to be restored, but he's not talking about the Jewish system of worship. Praise God. He's talking about the true system of worship, the worship of the gospel of the kingdom. He's talking about the worship of the end time, the worship that is to encompass the world before Jesus comes again. He's talking about the truths that he's giving to you and me, brothers and sisters. The cleansing of the sanctuary is the restoration of the true system of worship. And it's not talking about some Jewish sanctuary down in Jerusalem, like the temple that Herod built. No, it's talking about the true sanctuary, the true church of Christ, with the truths that have been committed to the Christian body, given to us again at the end of time. This is the restoration of true worship. This is the restoration of the religious aspect of the kingdom. Not the sanctuary, but the true sanctuary in which Christ dwells today. And the fourth prophecy, the prophecy of the king of the north and the king of the south, is a demographic kingdom. And here's what it says. The end of the prophecy is this. It says, at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered. This is the end of the story. Everyone that shall be found written in the book. So we saw the restoration of the geographic kingdom. The political kingdom, the true king shall take the throne. The religious kingdom, the sanctuary restored. And the demographic kingdom, the people are delivered. This is not talking about the Jews returning to Palestine. Not at all. It's talking about God's people being delivered from this planet. This is the complete deliverance from the captivity of Babylon. And that is what the book of Daniel is about. Your people shall be delivered. Everyone that shall be found written in the book. And that, brothers and sisters, is where I'm going to stop.